Making headlines for this week of October 16th. Global ultimatum. Miran Keshe tells nations of the world, 10 days to share free energy or we will give it to your people. A seismic shift. Global balance of power is shifting if it has not already shifted. The moment of truth. Exposing corruption and looking for a green jewel in the upcoming Canadian election. And pushing the envelope of disclosure, Dr. Stephen Greer reveals a potential game-changing player in the movement towards contacting ETs.
With news around, upon, within, and beyond our planet, the program making disclosure official. This is Cosmic Vision News. Here is Jeffrey West.
Greetings and blessings to all. Could this evening be the beginning of the end of the global cabal's control over energy worldwide? Has the cabal's geopolitical empire just been checkmated by a surprise player? Hot off the press this evening is the breaking news several hours ago that Miran Keshe, head of the Keshe Foundation, met with ambassadors from around the world and presented to them several inventions, but especially the plasma power generator that Keshe was making available to the countries of the world free of charge so that they could participate in the development and sharing of the technology to their respective people. The condition was this, that the ambassadors had to be willing to sign their nation's commitment to a treaty of peace being proposed by Keshe. However, with the presentation came an ultimatum. In respecting diplomatic protocols, the countries have 10 days to study the technology and begin taking steps to share it on a mass scale with their nationals. This gives each national government 10 days to decide if they are going to participate in sharing with their people. If they do, then perhaps the government will be held in higher regard by their people. If the government, however, does nothing within that 10-day period, the Keshe Foundation will be releasing the full documentation of the technology to the world with instructions about how to use it, and the nationals will no longer have a need for corrupt governance because the people will have everything they need and no longer be dependent upon a government to provide it. I was late joining the live stream event due to the preparation for the newscast. I was unable to determine who the first several ambassadors were to step up to receive their power generators. I believe, however, the Palestinian ambassador was among the top 10 to receive it. In giving the generator to the Palestinian ambassador, Keshe told the individual, "I hope that this device will help bring peace between Palestine and Israel." At times, it was a bit challenging to hear what Keshe was saying, and there were also technical glitches that disrupted the audio, so I'm unable to provide exact quotes in most cases. Keshe stated the following, however. This is a very powerful system for Western nations. It gives you energy for 30 to 40 years. You do not need to recharge or refuel it. If you use it, you can have enough to feed yourself, heat yourself at no cost. In addressing the ambassadors, Keshe said, "It's very simple. 10 days is long enough. It's how fast you want to transfer the knowledge to your governments and inform them what is about to happen." He produced a USB stick, and he says that it contains all the details for the construction and use of the device, and informed them that if they do not act in the interests of their citizens, then the Keshe Foundation will, and the people will be given access to the technology, and the governments will then have no choice but to follow. Representatives from China also picked up the devices from Keshe. Although I was unable to get an exact count, it seemed that at least 15 to 20 ambassadors came up at one point to receive their power generators. Keshe told these ambassadors that they have now made a commitment to him and also a commitment to their government and to world peace. You've got 10 days, ambassadors. On October 26th, we will release all the units you've just seen and teach everyone what to do with it, but this is just the beginning. If you understand how to use the power of plasma in the best way, it can improve travel to space and more. We will help you to come to space with us on the condition that you sign the peace treaty. No arms, no conflicts. The only difference is your nationals will do it, and you'll have to follow them. You have committed your nations to be one thing, to be committed to peace and to remove your nation from being enslaved to oil and other energy sources. Teach your nationals how to do it within 10 days, or we will do it for you. Ask your scientists to open the boxes, and within a day they will understand it and then tell your governments to share it. I give you one promise. If there is something that your people do not understand about this technology, someone from the Foundation will come to your country promptly and give you what you need to know and then leave. We are the new missionaries of peace and knowledge, and the Keshe Foundation is the only foundation that can not only talk about peace, but deliver the tools for peace. Keshe has apparently approached Iran to be the host country of the next presentation, and if no agreement is reached, then it will be China. Keshe also advised a Saudi prince to stop putting oil into tankers because he will no longer have a market for the oil. A few nations known to be represented at the presentation included New Zealand, China, the US, Japan, Norway, Iraq, Armenia, Malta, Austria, Portugal, Sweden, Poland, Germany, and possibly also Nigeria. And there were no doubt many others also. According to Keshe, we have broken all the rules of the present science. We learned something, but we don't patent it for control. We go on and teach others about it. We give enough that there will be no need to fight. I'm not a sentimental man, I am a scientist who knows what I'm doing. Use the new technology to bring peace, or your nationals will have so much that they will no longer have a need for you. The power generator also has applications for automobiles. According to Keshe, when the device is powering one's car, it can reduce fuel consumption by up to 70%. Italy is currently mass-producing the devices, and it seems that a plan by Keshe is to make the device available to all Italians as soon as possible. There were several inventions that Keshe introduced during the evening, and it was a bit unclear to me whether it was the plasma power generator or a different related technology, but Keshe also presented the idea that if this technology is applied to a fruit over a glass of water, all the qualities and properties of that fruit could be transferred into the water. In theory, what this means is that one fruit could provide nutrition and sustenance for countless people through countless glasses of water with this one fruit. The Galactic Connection website on October the 9th reported that Keshe says 10% of the world will no longer need gas by the end of October. This is divine activity being seen on a third-dimensional level. Obama was apparently given a plasma unit on the 24th of September with the understanding that if America does not accept peace for energy, Keshe sends his patents out to the world. The Illuminati's backs are against a very big wall. The rats in Washington, D.C. are still in shock and are looking for an escape with anonymity. A link to a 3-hour video with a presentation on the technology and related information will be in the show summary for those choosing to learn more. The video will highlight, among other things, Keshe's new plasma power unit and how plasma is going to catapult humanity into the future that we've been told is awaiting us. It is expected that the video of the presentation this evening will also find its way to the internet over the coming days as this ultimatum becomes known and people begin to anticipate whether or not things will unfold as they have been promised. The article, however, reveals a bit more, writing that for a cost of $200, every home can generate power and not be reliant on power companies. For those who cannot afford the unit, funding will be available from many sources around the world. Assuming that all the information is correct, as has been reported from the Keshe Foundation and other websites, and assuming that the device works as it has been explained, tonight, October 16th, could mark the beginning of another shift upon our planet, this one in the energy and technology sector. And this will ultimately have a huge impact on the geopolitical and geoeconomic systems, as well as helping to further birth Earth as a galactic star nation. The introduction of this unit has the potential to fundamentally break down the power structures of the global cabal, precisely because the unit is being made available fairly cheaply, but also that the plans are being made available to the world free of charge, and there are no patent restrictions on this technology. The peace treaty has been in the works since at least 2013. It is very possible that Keshe has taken the route he has now taken, perhaps because countries did not take his message very seriously before. Now he is forcing it upon them. After having listened to at least part of the presentation this evening, I can report that I am left with a feeling of cautious optimism. I want to believe that all the intentions of all involved are honorable and for the highest good of humanity and our planet right now. My optimism is cautious because it still remains to be seen how some of the global governments will react and what they may try to do. Of course, at the end of the day, it matters not, because as long as the technology is released as promised, and as long as the technology functions as promised, then it appears that one of the key dominoes is about to fall, and this will trigger all the other dominoes to fall, resulting in an accelerated movement forward for humanity and our planet in being freed from enslavement, debt, fear, separation, and harm, including ultimately the disclosure of our galactic families to the people of Earth. In other geopolitical news, while there are perhaps still many who are allowing themselves to be distracted by sporting events and other activities, they may now be missing what is arguably one of the several significant events that are reshaping the geopolitical structure on our planet as we currently know it. For many, these changes cannot come fast enough. For others, they may be scratching their heads and wondering why they did not see this coming, and even for others still, they may be starting to push the panic button as they begin to grasp the changes that are now starting to unfold. It has taken humanity a long time to finally accept that these changes are happening, never mind finding the courage to stand up and speak out on these changes. The discomfort of this withdrawal process will be stronger, and the healing will take longer because humanity did not speak up earlier. At the very least, had the world challenged the official report of the events on September the 11th, 2001, perhaps this group, known as the Global Cabal, would not have been able to inflict the political, financial, and environmental harm they have since that time, and our planet could have been much healthier, cleaner, and stronger now than it currently is. Out of Europe this week, if sources are correct, a rift may now be forming between the faction of the Global Cabal that has controlled Europe and the faction that has controlled the US, Israel, the UK, and arguably the rest of the planet. We have witnessed the EU playing some pretty nasty financial tricks on countries like Greece, Spain, Portugal, Ireland, and others with their fraudulent bank loans created out of thin air that have benefited no one except the bankers and political elites of various countries. This week, however, evidence is becoming more public that Europe may be finally agreeing with Germany that the demise of the US dollar as a global reserve currency and the power of the US military-industrial complex is now approaching its end. Author and futurist Lada Ray, a source well-versed on the affairs involving Russia and Eastern Europe, wrote the following on her blog page on October the 9th. She writes, "It turned out that the shock of Syrian refugees became the event that broke the camel's back. Oh yes, the US prostitutes, such as Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel and the bought and paid for European mainstream media, still puff their cheeks in the direction of Russia. But many of EU's elites, as much as ordinary citizens, approve of Russia's actions in Syria. The approval of Putin's actions is through the roof, the fact being diligently hushed up. Rhetoric towards Russia changed overnight once they realized Russia could quickly accomplish what the US and their own NATO were unable and unwilling to do for years: get rid of ISIS and stabilize Syria. Bought and paid for or not, the European politicians have started responding, and the turn begins. Indeed, that turn does appear to be starting. We have more on this from RT.
Well, RT's Laura Smith joins me now live for more explanation on this. Well, Laura, what's behind this change of view then?
Well, it certainly looks like part of a general thawing. Last week we saw the meeting of the Normandy 4 in Paris, which ended on a positive note, discussions about Ukraine there. And now Juncker talks of this almost conscious uncoupling from Washington. How will it develop? Well, there's certainly a feeling that there was pressure on the European Union to place sanctions on Russia over Ukraine. And in fact, even the US itself admits it. Let's hear that.
It is true. They did not want to do that. But again, it was America's leadership and the President of the United States insisting, oftentimes almost having to embarrass Europe to stand up and take economic hits to impose costs.
Well, we now know that those sanctions have proven to be bad for both parties. Bad for the Russian economy, obviously, but also for individual EU member states, which have both lost trade as a result of the sanctions and as a result of Russia's counter-sanctions. So this really marks a turning point in attitude.
The news website Russia Insider picked up and translated a story that first appeared in Germany's Deutsche Wirtschaftsnachrichten on October the 15th. The translated article reports that it seems that the EU is being greatly affected by the actions of Vladimir Putin in Syria. Suddenly, the EU President, Jean-Claude Juncker, is saying that the EU must not let the US dictate their relationship with Russia. He has demanded a normalization of relations and, indirectly, the end of sanctions. The article adds that the EU Commission President advocated a relaxation in the conflict with Russia. We have to achieve a sustainable relationship with Russia. It's not sexy, but has to be done. We can't go on like this anymore. He criticized US President Obama for having downgraded Russia as a regional power. Russia needs to be treated correctly. We cannot have our relationship towards Russia dictated by Washington. It's simply not on. Many may not even grasp the significance of this. It was only about 8 months ago that Juncker was standing firm with the US in its sanctions against Russia. Juncker was also advocating the creation of a European army to stand up to the alleged Russian aggression and defend European values. The turnaround represents nothing less than a monumental shift in the geopolitical structure that has formerly dominated affairs on this planet. Germany and France have been making hints at softening ties with Russia because their economies have suffered in supporting the US agenda against Russia. It is very possible that Juncker's turnaround is a result of a threat by France and Germany, that if they do not turn around, Germany and France would leave the European Union and the euro currency project, thus collapsing the power structure of the cabal's EU project. It might appear that Juncker understands what is now at stake for him and for the EU. It is perhaps no surprise to many that this news is becoming more relevant following several other very key and influential events. Russia's taking firm and decisive action against ISIS, or ISIL, and also the migrant crisis that has impacted numerous countries in Europe. Investigative historian and author Eric Zuess, writing for Global Research on October the 3rd, wrote that Europe is being overrun by refugees from American bombing campaigns in Libya and Syria, which created a failed state in Libya and which threatens to do the same in Syria. Europe is thus being forced to separate itself from endorsing the U.S. bombing campaign that focuses against the Syrian government forces instead of against ISIS, ISIL, Al-Qaeda, and al-Nusra. Zuess quotes an Iraqi politician as saying that the pressure on the Syrian regime, which is fighting ISIS, must be lifted. They should not try to strengthen the feeble Free Syrian Army or the FSA. There is no FSA. There is ISIS in Syria and Iraq. You cannot fight ISIS in Iraq, yet support it in Syria. There is one war and one enemy. The U.S. should give up its hypocrisy. People are not brainless. The other countries of the world are now starting to see the vulnerabilities of the U.S. Russia has not rolled over to play dead with its economic sanctions. In fact, Russia and China continue to move forward in implementing the financial structure that will render the Western world's fiat currency system obsolete. The world does not appear to buy the rhetoric that Russia was truly responsible for what happened in Ukraine, or that Russia shot down Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 over Ukrainian territory. Russia's actions in Syria have begun to expose the U.S. agenda in that country, and arguably in the Middle East overall, including their involvement with ISIS. Now that countries are apparently threatening to leave NATO and are increasingly moving away from trade deals involving the U.S. dollar, this global cabal is seeking ways to prey on human kindness while also keeping people in fear. Jim Willey, who often appears on other interview programs with insights on the geopolitical, geoeconomic situation, recently gave an interview to Time Monk Radio that was published on October 13th in YouTube. Willey offered the following insights regarding the U.S. involvement, Toyota trucks, and the dangers stemming from the refugee crisis.
I'd like to just make a real quick point about this Russian involvement in the Syrian conflict now. The U.S. military had identified a long list of ISIS targets. It's the Islamic State. And the Russians said, well, if you got all these targets, why aren't you attacking them? And that is the quintessential question. If the U.S. has the targets, why don't they attack them? It's because they're Langley assets. So the whole Russian involvement has brought a new spotlight that the U.S. government does not like. We've been operating with a hidden terrorist with ISIS for the longest time now, a couple of years, and it's being exposed as a Langley asset. The intelligence agencies across Western Europe are now becoming a little more clear that the funding and the organization and the weapons provision for the ISIS guerrillas is coming from Washington and their various channels. There was a question a few days ago, how come they have so many nice Toyota trucks? And there was linkage to Langley purchase orders. Let me just move quickly over to another related topic on the Syrian mess. If you're Ahmad, you've got a wife and 2 kids, you live in the suburbs of Damascus in Syria, and you can't feed yourself, the marketplace has been messed up, the supply chain for food has been messed up, American military drones have wiped out a number of different elements in the infrastructure. This is what we call nation building, and when what we're doing is we're wrecking the whole economic structure by knocking out bridges, marketplaces. We've even hit some schools. We have accidental drone hits with 200 civilians dead. We don't apologize for anything. The point is that this is a mess. It's not getting any better, and the U.S. is forcing this tremendous flow of refugees. So Ahmad, his wife, and 2 kids look to get on a ship and go to an Italian port, which is the nearest port. I asked a basic question. Where did Ahmad get the money for his wife and 2 kids, it's a family of 4, to pay for this passage on the ship? Well, the Austrian intelligence concluded after their own investigation, the funding for passage payments is coming from the U.S. government and their hidden non-governmental organizations, the NGOs, they're commonly called. So why is the United States paying for Ahmad to go to Italy?
Because he's a weapon.
Well, he can be, and for every 100 people that go through, and I doubt they have, all their passports. Are you kidding me? Ahmad and all his friends have passports? Really? They're struggling to survive and to eat the next meal, and they've got passports with proper stamps and photos? I don't think so. So with every 100 good guy Ahmads with the family of 4, there's probably one really scummy guy who's got some connections with channels for explosives and instructions and that sort of thing. I think this whole Syrian refugee issue is a tremendous smokescreen for upcoming terrorist violence all across Europe.
At least one other source seems to agree with part of Willie's comments. Aaron Brown, writing for the London Express on September the 10th, reported that an operative working for Islamic State has revealed the terror group has successfully smuggled thousands of covert jihadists into Europe. The Syrian operative claimed more than 4,000 covert ISIS gunmen had been smuggled into Western nations, hidden amongst innocent refugees. The ISIS smuggler, who is in his 30s and is described as having a trimmed jet black beard, revealed the ongoing clandestine operation is a complete success. The operative said the undercover infiltration was the beginning of a larger plot to carry out revenge attacks in the West in retaliation for the US-led coalition airstrikes. The only problem with this narrative, it seems, is that the US has not been attacking true ISIS locations, even after more than 1 year of alleged bombing campaigns. What the world is seeing, however, is that Russia has done more to shut down ISIS, while also exposing the US agenda in several weeks than the US has done in over 1 year. What it is beginning to look like more and more is that the US, sensing the fracture forming against it, is seeking to destabilize Europe with a flood of migrants, while also smuggling in people who will cause chaos and harm in Europe, forcing them back into fear and perhaps U.S. protection. This is assuming, of course, that these countries fall for that, and the signs are that they are no longer buying what the U.S. is selling, and thus the movement now to break from the U.S. and enter into new relations with Russia and the Eastern Alliance of countries, including BRICS. Paul Craig Roberts, in an article that was posted on the Ron Paul Institute website on October the 11th, has noted the decisive shift. He writes that the world is beginning to realize that a sea change in world affairs occurred on September 28th, when President Putin of Russia stated in his UN speech that Russia can no longer tolerate Washington's vicious, stupid, and failed policies that have unleashed chaos, which is engulfing the Middle East and now Europe. 2 days later, Russia took over the military situation in Syria and began the destruction of the Islamic State forces. Several commentators, such as Mike Whitney and Stephen Lendman, have concluded correctly that there is nothing that Washington can do about Russian actions against the Islamic State. The neoconservatives' plan for a UN no-fly zone over Syria in order to push out the Russians is a pipe dream. No such resolution will come out of the UN, and indeed, the Russians have already established a de facto no-fly zone. Putin, without having any verbal threats or engaging in any name-calling, has decisively shifted the power balance, and the world knows it. A vital point here to keep in mind might be this. We all have our historical biases against one country or another. The media has done its job well of selling the messages that the global cabal has wanted the people of the world to digest. The Western world has been sold messages of poverty and instability in other countries around the world, so Western people would value everything that they think they have. People from Eastern Europe were sold the message of how great things are in the West or in the U.S., without realizing that living in the West has come with its own repressed form of slavery. South America and Africa were merely exploited for resources from Western companies and countries. The Middle East has become the lightning rod for creating division among humanity. Both the U.S. and Russia are guilty of propagating lies on behalf of the same puppet masters. All of it was a lie so that wealthy banking interests could profit from conflicts and, more recently, also from the fraudulent debt created by having the US dollar as a global reserve currency. The Western media are great at calling out other nations whose oppression is clearly visible, but they are not great at calling out the oppression and slavery of Western countries using tactics that are subtle and hidden from obvious detection. There are those who may not trust Russia based on historical wrongs in the past. Let's set those aside for the moment. Every country is going to have those, and there is not one country, nor are there many humans, save those who have perhaps hidden themselves away from the world, who can claim to have lived a perfect life. Russia may have had its time as being controlled by the global bankers. Russia appears to be currently taking steps to clean up this mess in their world. The US, on the other hand, is currently experiencing the tyranny and control of the same group that once destroyed the former Soviet Union, the same group that is responsible for the harm to Ukraine and its people via the US. For whatever bad things Russia may have once been, the fact is that the US and other Western countries have now become almost exactly the same thing. The US, Israel, the UK, the EU, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand are now the principal destroyers of our planet. The politicians of Russia and President Putin are human and therefore have their human imperfections. What they are doing, however, is cleaning up a mess that humanity was not strong enough to clean up itself. People may try to create fear, saying that the West will be turned to communism or some other comment related to that. In the past, maybe those fears could have been justified. Look at the awakening that is happening, however. People are more informed and aware than ever before. Things that governments once got away with are no longer getting away with them. Even if, for a moment, Russia and China had a hidden agenda, the people of the world are far too awake and aware now to let them get away with it. Therefore, whatever they do now to help get rid of the global controllers from the West should be welcomed. We can deal with whatever else later. Right now, there is a danger that must be dealt with, and it is being dealt with. Many people of the world are looking for some kind of external savior. Yes, perhaps we do need someone who can come in to get things started because humanity has failed to act when we needed to act. People of the world cannot continue to be so lazy and complacent that they will sit back in their pride and ignorance and not participate in co-creating our new world. We can no longer sit back and watch others attempt to do something and then complain about it. If one is not willing to participate in a solution, any solution, one has no right to complain about attempts being made by others. If Russia does have a hidden agenda, it will be revealed. However, for now, Russia appears to be doing more for humanity and the planet at this time than the US has done over 200 years. The other big story this week focuses on whether or not the people of Canada are going to surprise their political leaders, and perhaps even the world, with a voice of awakening power, or whether Canada will return to its slumber sheep-like state and continue to be enslaved by the global cabal. Given the results that the mainstream political polls have been showing, this election, one that some have arguably called the most important election in the history of Canada, is going to be a toss-up between the three major parties, the current governing Progressive Conservatives, led by Stephen Harper, the Liberal Party, led by Justin Trudeau, and the New Democratic Party, led by Thomas Mulcair. On the outside, but still making a strong impression, is the Green Party, led by Elizabeth May. The odd thing that seems to have happened is that for most of this election campaign, the New Democrats were being given the upper hand in leading a minority government, and were even briefly tipped at having a small majority. This seems to have disappeared, however, according to the latest polls. The Liberal Party appears to now have the upper hand, and it is not exactly clear what has caused this shift. If I was to offer one theory, however, it might be this. As long as it appeared that Stephen Harper was firmly still in control, they were willing to let the public think that their voice was making a difference with the NDP leading. As it appears to be clear now that Harper's ship is sinking quickly, perhaps the cabal resources have shifted to supporting the Liberals for two reasons. One is that the Liberals have governed before, and those who control the banking and financial systems know how to deal with them. The second reason is that the Liberals have already given their support, at least in principle, for two major pieces of cabal-guided legislation, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Deal and Bill C-51, which is the Anti-Terrorism Act. There could, however, be trouble in Canada if Stephen Harper somehow manages to steal the vote once again. Frank Graves, writing for iPolitics on October the 12th, perhaps summed it up nicely by writing that we do note that Stephen Harper's surprising victory in 2011 was rooted in his huge success with the elderly and less educated cohorts. The Conservatives have a huge and stable lead with seniors at this time. Finally, it is worth noting the role of the cell phone-only population, the younger and better educated, in the coming days. Quite simply, this segment will be critical to the outcome of the election. In the last election, ECOS polls overestimated this segment's willingness to vote. This time around, that cell phone-only population is at least 3 times larger and tells us that they are much more certain to vote than they told us last time. When polled, they insisted they are extremely engaged and motivated by the values war that has come to underlie this election. What that means is this: if they show up, Harper loses. If they don't, he wins. Harper has somehow, once again, managed to deflect all of the scandalous issues facing him and his government, and has gotten Canadians to focus on trivial, racist, and divisive issues. To that end, Harper, in breaking his own rule about not allowing foreigners to influence an election outcome, he hired Australian Lynton Crosby to mastermind a political campaign that focused on fear and separation. Crosby recently helped UK Prime Minister David Cameron secure re-election, despite the odds, through the use of similar tactics. However, in a surprise revelation, thinkpoll.ca reported on October 15th that the Australian Dirty Tricks strategist brought in last month to salvage Harper's re-election campaign has abandoned the Conservatives, according to the Spin Doctor's partner. Lynton Crosby appears to have thrown in the towel after polls showed that the same tactics are failing to sway Canadian voters in sufficient numbers. Crosby's partner, Mark Textor, has launched an online campaign to distance their firm, Crosby Textor, from the Conservative campaign. This move is to cover up their failure in delivering fear into the Canadian campaign, it seems. Already, there are accusations of electoral fraud taking place. John Malloy, writing for the Canadian Daily.ca website, referred to a CBC article writing that the CBC reported that 436 voters in Calgary received voter information cards from Elections Canada directing them to the wrong polling station. And this isn't an isolated incident. Voters in BC, the Yukon, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, Nova Scotia, and Prince Edward Island, and beyond report similar incidents of being sent the wrong information. Harper was under fire back in 2013 for budget cuts to Elections Canada amid massive voting problems in the last election, and he has somehow managed to deflect this issue also, along with the current scandal involving the Senate, a scandal that does not appear to have been in the headlines at all during the election. An awareness campaign that has been proposed earlier in this election was to get different ridings to implement strategic voting. What this means is that people will agree to vote for the individual, either Liberal, NDP, or Green, who has the best chance of defeating the Conservative candidate, thus dealing a defeat to Harper. Canada's reputation is already bad enough through the leadership of Stephen Harper, but now it seems even media from the UK and the US have at least begun to notice how badly the election campaign appears to have gone. Marie-Marguerite Sabonqui, writing for London Guardian, on October 12th noted that Stephen Harper is the last remnant of the George W. Bush era in North America. The website pressprogress.ca on October 13th wrote, "Congratulations, Canada. Now the world is talking about your Prime Minister's racist rhetoric." The article goes on to mention at least 7 headlines from other non-Canadian media about what is happening in Canada. A headline on the HillTimes.com website on October 8th read, "Canadians are incapable of dealing with what actual change might look like at the polls." According to the article, Conservatives and Liberals have campaigned on countless promises since their parties' inceptions, and henceforth failed to implement many of said promises once entrusted with power by voters at the polls. Yet, Canadians still seem to elect only one of these two parties, naively expecting that the result will somehow miraculously change. Another thing that must happen is that the Indigenous tribes of Canada must unite together and get out to cast their votes. Red Power Media posted an article by Doug George Canantio of the Ottawa Citizen on October 11th, writing that many Native people believe the federal elections mean little or nothing to them, that no matter the promises and gilded speeches, meaningful changes are impossible. Others, such as my fellow Mohawks and other members of their respective Iroquois communities, argue that to take part in the Canadian political process is to compromise our standing as independent peoples, and that formal treaty status is incompatible with citizenship. A nation cannot make treaties with its own people. We have to influence the policy makers and the ministers. We must have the ear of the next Prime Minister. We have to make our voices heard by using our diplomatic skills and our ability to come to terms, not to make fatal compromises in our standing as Aboriginal nations, but to draft and enact those laws and regulations which are within our means to change. For Canadians who are interested in learning more about how voter suppression has been used in Canada, a documentary has been prepared and the rough version has been made available in time for the election. An article about the video comes from Warren Bell on October 14th, writing for the National Observer. He writes that Stephen Harper's capacity to trample on the rules of democracy and even ignore the law when he wants to get his own way, right up to almost Election Day, is laid out in riveting detail in a new documentary film. Called Election Day in Canada, The Rise of Voter Suppression. It's available in draft form, with and including a few minor technical glitches, from now until midnight, October 18th. The link to this video will be in the show summary for viewing and sharing. The media cannot be trusted with the reporting of polls and of information relating to the truth of what is really going on. People in the U.S. recently got a reminder of this, as CNN covered a debate between the candidates for the Democratic Party presidential nomination. To follow only the mainstream reporting of the event, it would seem that Hillary Clinton came out the big winner, but virtually all, if not all, internet polls put Bernie Sanders significantly ahead of Clinton. Sanders stood on his principles, and in a gesture of fair play, he even gave Clinton an olive branch when he stood up for her on the issue of the email scandal that is being used to distract the U.S. voters. It is this kind of principle that seems to be putting him in a position to boost his campaign to a higher level. Is there anything positive coming out of the Canadian election? In Canada, although perhaps not quite to the same degree, another politician is demonstrating qualities of hard work, commitment, accountability, but also with a sense of compassion and fair play. She is Elizabeth May, leader of the Green Party. She was the only Green Party member elected in the last election from a riding out on Vancouver Island on Canada's west coast. Since then, two people have crossed the floor, leaving their respective parties to sit with May as Greens, and they are running as candidates for the Green Party in the upcoming election. Many in Canada have been fearful of voting for the Green Party for one of three reasons. The party has no governing experience. 2, having a Green member may mean that the riding will get less funding and support because they are not part of an established party. And 3, people think that the party is only focused on environmental issues. The first one is true, and May appears to acknowledge this. She, however, is proving people wrong in the other two areas. May does not aspire at this time to be Prime Minister. Given the current possibility of a minority government, May would much rather broker a coalition government between the Liberals and the NDP while remaining on the outside of the coalition to hold the government accountable. And in her ideal position, the Greens could become the official opposition. This does not sound like one who is power-hungry, but one who truly wants what is best for Canada. And yes, the environment is a big part of that. It should be. After all, if our planet does not survive, there is no way humanity is going to survive. Therefore, something must change. The CBC reported on September the 11th that May was offering to mediate a coalition government, and then the day after, on the 12th, they also reported that one of the conditions of that coalition government would be to reduce the powers of the Prime Minister's office and reform the entire election system to eliminate what is known as the first-past-the-post system, while also introducing proportional representation based on the overall vote. On CBC Radio on October the 12th, May indicated that she wouldn't keep Stephen Harper in power for a nanosecond longer than is absolutely necessary. On top of parliamentary reform, May's desires are to bring Canada back into being a global leader environmentally at a climate summit in Paris later this year. She intends to rescind the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, and also the anti-terrorism bill. Also very high on her agenda is to rebuild, heal, and restore relations with the Indigenous tribes of Canada, and this alone should be enough to get all the members from tribes across Canada out to a voting booth. She is on the record as stating her intention to invite First Nations, Inuit, and Métis to a council of Canadian governments to play a role in creating policy for the first time in history, and would also repeal the Indian Act if they so choose to do so. No party leader appears to have stood so strongly for the Indigenous tribes of Canada and the environment as Elizabeth May has done. The media, however, did not pick up, unsurprisingly, an address given by May to her own constituents recently in her home riding. May used a word that I personally have never heard uttered from a Canadian politician when it comes to discussing politics. It is an L word. The following are a few highlights of this impassioned address.
We went straight from Greens can't get elected, ever, anywhere. A lot of you probably heard me tell the story at the time, just about a few days before the vote. And I did an interview with CKNW in which the host said, with all due respect, you couldn't get elected dog catcher. Yeah. At the time I thought, funny how that all due respect thing didn't make it to the end of the sentence. But with some time to digest his question, I realized that he was absolutely right. Because I would never run for dog catcher. I would be a terrible dog catcher. catcher. So fortunately, I did know that although I would be a terrible dog catcher, I was running to be your member of Parliament, and I was fairly certain that I would be an excellent member of Parliament because I love Parliament and I love democracy. And I knew the rules of Parliament well enough to know that it simply wasn't true what the national media said next. They seamlessly moved from Greens will never get elected to, well, they're all happy a Green got elected, but we'll never hear from her again because one MP can't do anything. Now again, when you reflect on that, that's actually true if you're an MP in the Conservative, Liberal, or Democratic Party. Honestly, I do mean this from the bottom of my heart. My friends in all those parties are wonderful people, but they're not allowed to color outside the lines. And the lines are carefully drawn and enforced. So what I found was what I'd always believed to be true, that just as one person can change the world, just as one citizen can stop a horrible project, just as one person can imagine and create something brilliant in their community, so too can one MP do anything by using the rules to maximum effect and being here all the time. So in the last 4 years, I've been, well, first of all, the thanks are entirely to the voters of Saanich Gulf Islands. What a brave thing to do. Really brave. To take a chance like that, to defeat a sitting cabinet minister and to decide, right, we're going to get behind Elizabeth and have the first Green MP represent us, and we're going to operate on the hope and the faith that she'll do the things she said she'd do, and that will make it worthwhile. And that's an extraordinary honor for me, that many voters would decide to take a chance and change the way they'd always voted, whether they used to vote Conservative or they used to vote New Democrat or they used to vote Liberal, or quite a lot who decided to stop voting altogether. I'm optimistic about this election. You have to know that. I'm so optimistic about rescuing Canada, taking our country back, getting back the policies and the laws that I never imagined would be scrapped, getting rid of statistics, Canada's ability to tell us what's going on. I mean, who would have thought we'd have a Prime Minister who disliked statistics, who so hated evidence that he wanted to bury those and muzzle those who say things. It's not just shoot the messenger, it's fire the messenger. There are no messengers, there are no voices to tell Canadians what's going on. We have to restore evidence-based decision-making. We have to restore essential democracy. We have to stop omnibus budget bills. We have to get rid of the idea that a Prime Minister who sees a vote he's going to lose can go to the Governor General and shut down Parliament. The anti-democratic things that have occurred are piling on and piling on and piling on to the point that so many Canadians are saying, I'm terrified. And this is where I think it's important. This is the message for Greens, and I want to be sure that I share it with you because it's a message of hope and optimism. We must not be afraid. That is exactly what Stephen Harper wants us. He wants us to be afraid of extremist jihadi terrorists. He wants us to be afraid of women wearing a niqab. He wants us to be afraid of First Nations on the line against pipelines. He wants us to be afraid of each other. And he particularly doesn't mind if we're afraid of him, because fear-based thinking is never very smart. When you're making a decision because you're afraid, you can't see the right direction. Fear-based policies are toxic in a healthy democracy. We have to reach out and find those things that we have in common and build on those. We are a movement, yes, a political party, but we're not about seeking power for ourselves. We're about wresting power from people who are dangerous when they hold it. We're about bringing power back to citizens, back to our communities, and back to the fundamental things that make us Canadian, which have more to do with taking care of each other than fearing each other. Stephen Harper has tried to remake our values, remake our idea of who we are. And we reject that fear and we embrace the hope, because we have the hammer of justice, we have the bell of freedom, and we have a song to sing about the love between our brothers and our sisters all over this land, because the Green Party isn't fueled by money, and the Green Party isn't fueled by corporate interests. Never said it before out loud, but here you go. The Green Party is fueled by love.
One other item that May and the Green Party appear to be endorsing is the introduction of a basic or minimum income for all, a project that is either being explored or has already been implemented for testing in several locations around Europe, including the Netherlands. Elizabeth May has now introduced the L word into politics. The energy of love now has a foot in the door of the Canadian political system, and in combination with the rising consciousness of Canadians and humans worldwide, perhaps this energy, if guided and anchored within as many people as possible, maybe this energy can move like a wave across Canada on Monday, October 19th, and help manifest the outcome that many are claiming to want, but also the outcome that is for the highest good of Canada and the world. As a journalist, it is not my place to tell one how to vote. I would, however, like to offer something for consideration. Elizabeth May is not looking to be Prime Minister. She only wants to have enough seats to be able to make a difference in being able to hold government accountable. If there are enough people in Canada who may be willing to take the chance on their Green candidate that the people of May's riding placed in her, to perhaps elect 20 or 30 Green members of Parliament, perhaps even more across Canada, then maybe the country just might have a shot at becoming an even better country than it was before. If not, then Canada risks sinking into a constitutional crisis. And even this, looking at it from a higher perspective, might be exactly what Canada needs right now also. In a few other quick headlines for the week, the Era of Wisdom blog site is reporting on October 10th that hundreds of thousands of Germans came out to protest the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership Agreement, or TTIP. Perhaps this is more of the pressure that is building on the German leadership to finally take some steps away from participating in U.S. hegemony. Sputnik News reported on October 12th that based on the results being seen in Syria, Iraq would prefer to deal with Moscow rather than Washington. Lada Ray, from her blog site, Future Trendcast, reported last month, actually, that the Lugansk People's Republic, one of the breakaway republics within Ukraine, was getting ready to make a formal request to join Russia. This, according to intel given to her from someone in Donetsk. In a separate posting, Lada Ray reported on October 9th that the people of Bulgaria have begun to see through the illusion of what the US and the EU promised them when they joined the Union. In the midst of all the problems since then, the people of Bulgaria are beginning to remember a deeper, stronger history with Russia and are making their way back to renewing that relationship. In financial news now, it may be hard to know exactly what is meant by comments being made by various financial pundits and news sources. Sources in the Western world are slowly realizing the truth about the global financial system, and one of the words they seem to be using to describe the movement away from the US dollar and US hegemony is the term slowdown, among others. The International Business Times, in an article by Angelo Young on October 7th, reports that the foreign feast on U.S. debt is over. For years, the central banks of emerging market countries have devoured U.S. debt in order to bolster their foreign currency reserves. The trend intensified amid booming trade surpluses, fueled largely by the sale of commodities, from soybeans to crude. Now, amidst a global economic slowdown spurred by China, large purchasers of U.S. Treasury bonds, including China, Russia, Brazil, are dumping U.S. debt at a rapid pace to increase government revenue. The recent sell-off is the biggest decline in foreign official demand for U.S. notes and bonds since records began in 1978. Deutsche Bank Securities says foreign central banks have sold in the last 12 months ended in July $123 billion in U.S. Treasury debt maturing within a year. That's compared with a peak of $230 billion in purchases of U.S. debt in the year ended January 2013. The People's Bank of China which shocked global markets by devaluing its currency on August the 11th, has been selling dollars and buying yuan to prevent the currency from dropping below its target rate. As China sells U.S. bonds to control its currency, Russia, Taiwan, Norway, and Brazil have also been selling U.S. debt to bolster their currencies. It has been the sell-off of U.S. Treasury debt that is alleged to be one of the reasons why the U.S. dollar has been hyperinflating. It is also a warning sign that is not being acknowledged by the North American media especially. Will Hutton, writing for the London Guardian on October the 11th, notes that only the geopolitical changes, but also writes that the economic world order is collapsing, and this time there seems no way out. As always, it is the perspective that one has that determines what is happening. Hutton and others use the word collapse as they're approaching the changes from a perspective of something being lost, whereas another may approach the same event with the perspective of it being a transformation, because there will be something much better to be gained, not only for oneself, but also for humanity in general. Kelly Brown of Stansbury Research, writing in an article on the patriotsandpolitics.com website on May 30th, earlier this year, noted a prediction and a date that is soon approaching. Brown wrote the following: "It's no secret China wants to make dramatic changes to the international currency system. Since 2009, they have made currency agreements with more than 20 countries and various regions, including Switzerland, Brazil, South Korea, the United Kingdom, the Eurozone, and Russia. All of these deals simplified trading by allowing these nations to make exchanges in local currencies instead of U.S. dollars. And this trend is accelerating. China has now worked with more than 10,000 financial institutions, an increase of 1,011% from June of 2011, to do business in Chinese yuan. And many are convinced that China is working to back their currency with gold to make it the #1 alternative to the U.S. dollar." The article then adds the following: "Now, an American doctorate currency expert named Steve Sugarud says that we have a very good idea how the Chinese will secure their spot as the true alternative to the U.S. dollar, and it's all very likely to start October 20th of this year. On this date, China, with the help of one of the world's leading international banking agencies, is looking to make an epic move in the world's currency markets, which will send shockwaves throughout China, America, and the rest of the world." Sugarud was quoted as saying that, "The truth is, you're unlikely to see a currency event of this magnitude again in your lifetime. I believe this announcement will trigger one of the most profound transfers of wealth we've ever seen. You simply must be prepared and understand what's about to happen." Now, it's not worth paying attention to specific dates, but all the signs are pointing to significant changes to come in the world as we currently know it. How or when exactly these changes play out depend upon those involved, but also on how the general public approaches the changes, and whether or not they choose to receive or resist what is now unavoidably a wave coming towards us, and one can choose to either sink and drown or ride the wave. In disclosure-related news for the week, Dr. Stephen Greer, founder of the Disclosure Project back in 2001 and also the CSETI Institute, was involved in 2 fairly high-level events relating to the disclosure of our galactic families during the month of September. According to his website, SiriusDisclosure.com, with Sirius being the name of the planet and star system. The following are some of the highlights from the 2 meetings. In Lisbon, Portugal, on September the 3rd, Greer shared his vision for a new civilization on Earth. He also briefed participants on meetings he had with European royal families and government officials in the UK, Monaco, France, the Vatican, and Liechtenstein. He also shared more info about exciting developments involving the French Ministry of Defense and their increased participation in the events that related to something Greer calls a CE5, a close encounter of the fifth kind, involving open contact and communication between humanity and our galactic families. From September the 5th to the 12th, Greer was in London conducting a workshop teaching people how to make contact with ET civilizations using the CE5 protocols and how to really become an ambassador to the universe. A video presentation of more than 2 hours is available, and the link will be in the show summary. For now, here is a very short, relatively speaking, excerpt of a few points from the London Disclosure event. Greer starts by giving a bit of background to the work, then comments on the fact that even certain politicians are not privy to the disclosure information, and then he comments on the shifting of consciousness before going into more detail of his work with military officials in France.
Over the last 7 or 8 years with the French Ministry of Defense, the irony of being the head of the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence and the founder of the Global Disclosure Movement is that since that date, I've been sitting on the most important government document in the history of the UFO subject, but didn't feel I could share it because I didn't want to burn bridges to the Sarkozy regime and the Ministry of Defense officials working with the French government at that time. I feel at this point enough water has passed under the bridge that I can share it, so that's why I'm sharing it here in London and worldwide, and soon it will be up on our website. In fact, this is the 25th anniversary of the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And it started as an effort to organize people, a citizens' diplomacy effort, to end the hegemony of covert programs on the issue and let the average person make contact and be the face of humanity instead of a bunch of petro-Nazis and militarists and warmongers and misanthropic money whores. By 1991-92, we had gone to Belgium and had some amazing close encounters of the fifth kind, which is when humans initiate contact and these interstellar vehicles and people show up. And then we went down to Florida and had a group of about 50, 60 people just for a weekend. And as you've all seen in the film Sirius, there were these 4 ET craft that just materialized in the sky. Everybody familiar with Lord Hill Norton? He'd been your MOD head years ago. And when I was at his cottage here in Hatcher, he says, you know, the whole time that I was head of the Ministry of Defense, and of course MI5 and MI6 by extension, you don't have a separate CIA director type person, I was never told anything about this. I only found out about this after the fact. And he was very upset about it. And most people would assume someone at that level of your intelligence community or your Ministry of Defense, you know, major G7 country, group of 7 country, top economy in the world, would be knowledgeable and would be pulled into the briefings on this subject. But they are not. And the same is true in the United States, for the most part. So progress requires a more universal outlook based on the concepts of cosmic awareness and universal peace. And this then requires some people in governments and the grassroots to say, let's find a better way of making contact. Let's not recreate the mistakes of the last few thousand years, because a new era has opened, the hallmark of which is universal peace, not interstellar war. So we have got to understand that the existential crisis we have is really in consciousness and our social and spiritual development, but that has to be then applied into our policy. And what's beautiful about this is that even after explaining all this to the Ministry of Defense officials and their Air Force folks and intelligence officials in France, well, the first thing they said was, this is fantastic and terrible, when I explained the nature of secrecy in the United States, the United Kingdom, and many other countries. And they said, but then they said, well, I don't know how much we can do, we'll do what we can. As soon as they faxed me information about what they wanted to do with our team to go and make contact, they got a call. Their ambassador from France to the United States got a rather nasty call, irate, said, what the hell do you think you're doing? And the ambassador from France to the United States said, well, we're planning to initiate this research project, but also a peaceful rapprochement with these interstellar visitors in a scientific but a visionary way, and we're cooperating with Dr. Greer and his team to do so. and the intelligence folks in the U.S. on the other side saying, just stay away from any U.S. assets in any U.S. territory. And the guy said, look, it'll be on French soil, so bug off. And that's how that conversation went. So there were all manner of delays, which when you see the translation of this letter, you'll see it, the Admiral Morin is apologizing for the delays because there's all this interference going on. You don't step onto this stage without, I mean, you're going to, anyway, you're going to have the whole thing coming at you like a freight train, which we have. But the French stayed true to their purpose, and we eventually did a fantastic CE5, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind event. Now, was anyone there in France in 2010 or 11? Most people don't know that they were there to be trained, but it was actually an event for the Admiral and the Ministry of Defense. So they piggybacked their Admiral and their systems on a public CE5. And of course they were there sitting in plaid shirts and looked like just regular Frenchmen. But the whole area, we were on a 2,200 acre estate, was cordoned off. And you'll see a photograph from a trans-dimensional ET vehicle that blipped in and blipped out very quickly there. But they tracked objects going over the site in excess of 200,000 kilometers an hour, and all kinds of phenomena in the field, weird things like something you see on Close Encounters of the Third Kind. We had the cars parked in a hayfield, and some interstellar trans-dimensional energy form went up and down the cars and turned the lights on. Did all kinds of strange things. So they were very, very pleased with that, and so then they've sort of gone on from there. But the idea, just the idea that a Ministry of Defense official at this level, very senior admiral, and his team, working at the highest levels of the French government, would say, we want to pursue interstellar and intergalactic contact for peaceful purposes. This is huge news. This is an enormous development.
Certainly, in light of the information from Dr. Greer, combined with the information that is apparently about to be released from the Keshe Foundation, it is perhaps possible that not only will humans be able to have contact with galactic families, but the technology will also be available for humanity to travel among the stars so that a peace-oriented civilization on Earth can begin to experience itself as a birthing galactic star nation.
In this week's final words, this group that I call the Global Cabal has certainly had its way with humanity for a long period, haven't they? Many are beginning to grow extremely tired of the lies, frauds, scams, false flag events, and other weapons of mass distraction. Many are also beginning to reach out and share this fatigue and frustration, claiming that they are ready for change. One of the challenges, however, is that now that this change is becoming more visible to the mainstream public, people are pulling back and becoming a bit defensive, because they never realized that change meant having to let go of so many of our attachments to the current world. I want to emphasize that again. Lose our attachments to things in our current world. This does not necessarily mean that we have to give up those things, at least not yet. It is merely going through the mental process of letting go of those things so that those things no longer have power over who you are choosing to be. If you have those things, wonderful. And when a time comes in the future when changes really begin to heat up and certain things may disappear, or perhaps just change form to something else, this will be wonderful also. Long-time listeners will know that I have used the analogy of a boil on the skin to describe the changes. Negative energies in one part of the body build up under the skin. Part of the wound becomes harder while surrounded by toxins. This bubble gets bigger until it is ready to break. The hard part inside the boil is called the core, and this could describe the people and institutions most directly connected to this cabal group that has been enslaving humanity and destroying our planet. The toxins around the core may represent the people who serve and protect this core group. The boil is breaking now on the global condition. It is becoming messy, and there are toxins and blood spilling out. I apologize that some will not enjoy this particular analogy, but let's face it, our global condition has also become very ugly, and until we look at it and acknowledge it, we cannot move forward as a collective humanity. The toxins in blood are slowly cleaned up, and what is revealed is this core inside the wound. When this core is removed from the body can begin to heal. Just the same with our world. As we remove the core group of power that has been enslaving humanity and destroying the planet, so too can we begin to heal. In the physical body, there will be a hole in the skin for a period of time as the body regenerates. This takes some time. So too will it take time as humanity heals. It may not look pretty for a while, but humanity, just like the body, will heal and regenerate. Of course, what this also means is that humanity must learn the lessons and be able to understand the negative energies that were present to cause the boil in the first place, so that those energies cannot return again. I have mentioned recently about how I think Presidents Putin and Obama are achieving the same goal but from opposite directions. I observe the people in the U.S. who are recently becoming more vocal about arresting Obama and charging him with treason. These individuals perceive Obama as being weak, or that he is destroying the U.S. and everything that these people have become addicted to in their world. From their perspective, they see Obama as destroying the power that many were addicted to while the U.S. was allegedly on top of the world. This is now disappearing, and they are blaming Obama. This may be false, and it may also be true. The president historically has had very little real control over the affairs of the U.S. on a geopolitical level. In this sense, Obama is not responsible for what has happened historically. It has been those associated with the global cabal and the neoconservative Zionist interests. At the same time, however, as mentioned recently, perhaps Obama is facilitating the destruction of the U.S. as it currently exists in order to expose the core and thus facilitate some healing later on. Those who are in the process of awakening have been hearing messages about how this process some call ascension, or even the process towards what some call enlightenment, is supposed to all be good, and that we will be co-creating a magical new world with higher consciousness for all. Some have the belief that enlightenment is all about happiness, health, and abundance for all. Although I personally believe and feel this to be the final goal, there is a part of the message that seems to scare most people, and I admit, at times, it even scares me a bit. Before we can achieve that goal, there is something we must each do on a personal level, and we must also do it on a national level, and also on a planetary level. It requires the release or the destruction of most of what we have been hanging on to, that we use to justify our experience that we call reality. This means on all levels, but on the most terrifying level, it means also within oneself. Now, as I say the word destruction, some of you may begin to formulate your own ideas of what this destruction may look like. Some of you may look at our current world with the threats of war and think that I am referring to the physical destruction of our planet through wars. I am not referring to this, although, yes, depending upon how humanity chooses to act, this outcome does remain a possibility. I, however, choose to believe that humanity does not want this outcome. Destruction does not necessarily have to involve the physical tearing down of the world as we currently know it. Although, yes, there will be some great transformation happening as more humans begin to choose to make more life-honoring choices. In making these choices, there will be the removal of things that no longer serve oneself or the collective good. In this case, it is no longer destruction, but rather transformation, because the changes are welcomed. It seems to me that it is only when one approaches change from the perspective of losing something, does one interpret a change as destructive. A man and a woman may separate and divorce. From a societal level, it may be perceived as destructive because of the harm that may be done to family and children. Of course, if souls choose to be negatively impacted, then there may be harm on different levels. If the separation, however, comes from a space of love, where both souls have recognized that their time together has been served and they did what they came together to do, is this considered destructive? Would it not be more destructive to each soul to stay in that relation when it no longer serves one, the other, or both? How can this be communicated to children, but more importantly, to our society at large? One spiritual teacher by the name of Adyashanti has been credited with saying the following: "Do not think that enlightenment is going to make you special. It's not. If you feel special in any way, then enlightenment has not occurred." Adyashanti describes people who try to claim their enlightenment and wear it as a badge of honor, or that they are more awake or more aware than others, or perhaps more deserving of recognition and support than others. Adyashanti continues, "The funny thing about enlightenment is that when it is authentic, there is no one to claim it. Enlightenment is very ordinary. It is nothing special. Rather than making you more special, it is going to make you less special. It plants you right in the center of a wonderful humility and innocence. Do not get stuck in the idea of enlightenment." Here is the key message now from Adyashanti. Enlightenment is a destructive process. It has nothing to do with becoming better or being happier. Enlightenment is the crumbling away of untruth. It's seeing through the facade of pretense. It's the complete eradication of everything we imagined to be true. Enlightenment is, in the end, nothing more than a natural state of being. Is it not necessary, therefore, that beliefs and structures that have contributed to our enslavement and to the destruction of our planet be removed? If one is truly claiming to want a planet where everyone lives in true peace, with health and abundance for all, would it not be more appropriate to welcome the changes that are unfolding, even if it results in a degree of uncertainty and perhaps even a degree of discomfort for a period of time while we adjust to the changes? One is, after all, going through a withdrawal from an addiction to a way of living that has not honored life, and thus it will take some time. And it may not look pretty for a while this healing and regeneration takes place. We have been conditioned through fear to live our lives a certain way, and many around the world are no longer choosing to live in this fear. Each individual, in his or her uniquely different, yet equally beautiful way, is being called to serve, and those choosing to answer this call are laying the foundation while empowering others to find the courage to serve also. It is not about who is better or popular or who has more money or status in one's service. Those are labels that no longer apply. Each serves in whatever capacity one is called to serve, and as long as it honors oneself, all of humankind and our planet, while bringing joy, this is ultimately what it is all about. On one level, it is about you, a human, being what your heart is calling you to be, while, on another level, you are a spiritual being having this human experience. The transcript for these final words will appear in the show's summary. Create a wonderful week until our next Moment of Now. So that is a sample of the unfolding higher consciousness news around the world this week. Cosmic Vision News is broadcast weekly from the CosmicVisionNews.com website. Links to stories used in this broadcast are published in the show summary posted on the blog page. Thank you for sharing your time with me. I'm Jeffrey West, reminding you that enlightenment is a destructive process, the crumbling away of untruth. It's seeing through the facade of pretense, leading to the eradication of everything one has imagined to be true. Until our next moment of now, stay grounded in love, hold the vision of light and peace in your hearts, and keep your eyes to the skies. Disclosure is unfolding all around you. Namaste.